Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Jason.
I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Our friend Alex Standy can't join us today. She's dealing with that ongoing medical issue that she's been experiencing for the last couple of years. She thought she was past it, but now it's coming back. So she'll be back hopefully next week. And we actually heard from Dan Mangena. Dan is as we all know, he's a world traveler. He's been in Dubai, and that's why he hasn't been able to connect in lately. But he's expecting to be back probably toward the end of November. So we'll get the whole team back on Thursdays, somewhere around then. But in the meantime, we are not bereft. We have a guest joining us today. Her name is Dr. Claire Unis. And Claire has one of the most interesting takes I have ever heard of about what to do to help people with current medical situations. She ties in the arts. What a great idea. And she does it through her own work and also by advocating to others. I mean, she is a board certified practicing pediatrician. But she has a love for writing, and she has a love for helping, to understand every individual's needs and communicating with them and helping them to where they want to get to. So, Dr. Unis, thank you for joining me on the show today. And I love your take. That's really cool.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here. You're very kind to have me on your show.
Oh, glad to have you. So how did all this start, Claire? I mean, this is this is really novel. So if it's novel, we have to have a novel story, right?
Well, I think I am like many. Well, maybe not like many. My love for writing started when I was very little. I think I wrote a song when I was like 6,
wow.
in a little journal that I started, and I was going to write songs all the time. And, clearly this was not any kind of, amazing musical feat, but the love of writing really took off from when I was very little. I loved the idea of describing things. I loved the idea that any individual person has that power to create within them. And that even as a little 6-year-old kid, I could be a writer. So that love started very, very young. And, through probably my entire childhood, but especially once I got to high school, I kept a journal and always aspired to write a book, always aspired to become an author, even though I sort of, was also falling in love at the time with, sports and the human body and all the different amazing ways that we can use our bodies, and really got excited about the idea of medicine as early as 8th grade. So I've always kind of had this little duality going on between the creative side and the scientific curiosity that kind of propelled me into medicine ultimately.
That's very cool. I like that. But ultimately, from what I gather, you kind of started to marry the two together because you saw certain things weren't quite working in medicine. So talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So, so that started in medical school. I was a couple years into medical school and really a little disenchanted with the amount of just pure rote memorization, studying, regurgitating for tests, all that academic drivel,
yeah.
The academic demand that everyone sort of associates with medical school, and really feeling like, what the heck does this have to do with actually helping people in the long run? So having all this knowledge does not necessarily make you the best doctor. It's a necessary base, but it wasn't the whole picture. And then finally, starting those clinical years, I was kind of blown away by the experience of putting on a white coat and suddenly having people share their stories with me and being privy to these incredible confidences from the patients who I was getting to know. And I was introducing myself as a medical student, but that experience was mind blowing. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have to write about this because I can feel myself changing. I can feel myself becoming someone who is taking on this responsibility for another human, who's taking on the need to be compassionate and to synthesize a story into a medical story, into a situation that I can help with. And that process of feeling myself transform from someone who just thought of this as an ideal to someone who actually would be worthy of wearing a white coat really drew me to feel like, okay, I have to put these stories down. And so I wrote in my journal, but I also looked for a graduate school program in creative writing.
Oh, okay.
And I ended up spreading out medical school over I only added 6 months to the end of medical school, but I kind of did an MFA program at the same time as my 4th year of med school and finished that 6 months after med school. So I actually entered my writing program and formalized my interest in writing at the same time I was becoming a doctor.
That's cool. Yeah, that's very cool. And anybody who has ever known either a pre-med student or a med student and known anything about the kind of courses they were taking, the one course that always comes to my mind that kind of defines that rote memorization is organic chemistry. And it's the one that they all go into a panic about. It's the worst part of the entire curriculum as far as they're concerned. My God, why do we have to do all this stuff? It's terrible. And how do I get above a D? And, all that other kind of stuff, the angst that goes along with that. So, I mean, That's what, for those of us on the outside looking into your profession and the students as they're going through the rigors of getting into med school, that to me is the defining one, organic chemistry. Like, oh God, this is so boring. This stuff is so boring. Oh, it's so boring.
There's a lot of proving grounds on the way there, right?
Mm.
It's just one of the hurdles that or the hoops you have to jump through to prove that you're capable of doing the academic work.
Right.
And then for most of us, I don't think it really ever comes up again.
Which is a good thing, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not something I've thought about any length in many, many years.
Right.
That's for sure. Yeah.
But you also noticed that your colleagues, both in medical school and beyond, were experiencing challenges that you felt you were able to address directly. Tell us that part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, fast forward, I finished medical school, I finished graduate school, I went into residency and got married and had kids and started my practice, and life got busy and I really didn't write for many years. And then I would say, let's see, how old were my kids about that time? My kids were about 9 and 11 or 8 and 10. And finally I'm looking up from sort of the tunnel going, okay, I've been in practice now for many years. I'm pretty comfortable as a general pediatrician. And I'm also recognizing that this is not a medical system that is going to be sustainable in the long run. Our medical system is broken. We could talk forever about that if you want to.
I'd like to just hear like a very brief overhaul of what not an overhaul, an overview. Well, an overhaul might be useful, but that's not what we're talking about. An overview of what you see as the broken pieces, because I think different people see different things. So I'm curious to know what your take is from the inside.
There's different aspects of it. I think what frustrates me is this, the intervention of corporate interests in the medical relationship. So when you learn to become a doctor, you really are learning about doctor-patient confidentiality and how to do the right thing by your patient and make sure that you're complete in doing all of the things for your patient. And then you get into practice and your insurers are interfering and your medical organization may be interfering. And the bottom line is that there's a lot of pressure to produce. So you need to see more patients. You need to see them more quickly. You need to do all these extra things, the phone messages and the emails and all the things on the side, but it doesn't impede or it doesn't affect the number of hours you're scheduled for. And so more and more, there are additional requirements put on physicians and other clinicians. And, this is sort of that empathy. This is like wearing maternity jeans, right? Like they know that it's always going to stretch a little bit more. And that's how the empathy is that doctors have, or the way that we've been taught to be thorough in caring for patients is that's sort of an expanding expectation. So we can keep heaping things on what the clinicians are expected to do without necessarily paying them any more money for that.
Right.
And, it becomes a situation where burnout, and I'm sure I know you said you've had several doctors on recently. I'm sure you've heard a lot about burnout. Well, the burnout is very real. And it's that everybody has a bottom. Like those jeans will not stretch forever. At some point, you're stretched to the max and you cannot keep giving and giving and giving and still feel like a whole person and still come home and be a good parent and a good partner and whatever else is important to you in your life. So I think when I talk about it, I'm talking about the marathon we've all been running that can only end at burnout if we don't change what our expectations are of clinicians. And so the longer I've been in medicine, the more I've seen how this affects people and how difficult it can be for people to draw lines. So I started out working full time, and I've gradually cut back, and I work half-time clinical right now because that's how much I can do and feel like I'm giving my 100% at work, but I'm still giving my 100% at home.
Yeah, that balance is always a tough balance for any career. I can imagine it's especially tough for a doctor.
It is. And I also got to a point where my kids were old enough that I was like, okay, I can give more, but who I really want to give more to is my fellow clinicians, because these are the people who I'm seeing really need something. They really need shoring up. And how can I contribute to that? And some of it's just restlessness. When you've been in any job, I think for a number of years, and I was probably about 15 years in I was 15 years in at that time, and you get to a level of comfort and a level of mastery. It's like, okay, what's next? Right? Like, at least that's been me my whole life. Whenever I've gotten to a place of comfort, it's like, okay, time to jump a new hurdle or find a new path. And I could have gone toward a fellowship and tried to study something new, and that occurred to me. But I really, when I sat back and looked at it, the one thing I've always wished I had more time for since I got that degree, especially, is writing. And I finally said, okay, how can I write and incorporate this in somehow? How can this relate to medicine? So in looking around, I found that some various programs have been sort of started in narrative medicine, but also in literature in medicine. And I started to investigate different ways in which we can incorporate the literary humanities into medicine, in a way that's meaningful. So, that can take different forms. And I was just learning about narrative medicine at that time. And I proposed to someone who I consider a mentor. I said, maybe I should go get a degree in narrative medicine. And he said, don't you already have a Master of Fine Arts in Writing? And I said, oh, yes.
Oh, that's right. I'm the expert.
Maybe you don't need that degree quite yet. Maybe you could use the writing and see where it takes you. And so, I didn't start right out with narrative medicine, although I've been going to conferences and studying it, and I'm starting to do some classes in it. I started out doing something that I just called literature in medicine for my medical group. And I created a couple different classes. I think I actually have 6 or 7 that I've created over the years at this point. But I taught, along with a wonderful woman who's a patient family advisor, we taught a writing workshop for clinicians. And then on my own, I taught something I called Life Literary Inspiration for Expression, where I would bring a short story to everyone to read ahead of time. We would discuss it, and then I would give them a writing prompt just to free write, just reflective writing for fun. I started a book club, and then a writing workshop for people who are already writing. You'd be surprised how many doctors are writing on their own.
Writing creatively, you mean? Writing
creatively. We take in so many stories. We carry so many stories and so many realizations over the years. And there are many people like me who really make sense of the world by writing about it. So what I found is it was one of those things where I just sort of asked, and lo and behold, there was this whole group of really wonderful people who've been trying to write books or write fiction, who were really happy to find like-minded clinicians willing to come together. And they're still meeting. This is every other week. We bring writing to one another and share input and feedback so that we can hone one another's projects. So lots of creative ways to use literature and writing and kind of shore clinicians up. And all of this, I kind of started right around the time the pandemic hit. So it was really fortuitous that we could connect across geographic areas by Zoom in a way that was both safe and really, I think, emotionally shored people up quite a bit at a time that we clinicians felt quite beleaguered, right? The fact that this became a political fight instead of a health one, it was really demoralizing. So being able to gather with other clinicians who were, just showing up every day, trying to do our best, was really, really empowering.
That's very good. I have to ask a really stupid joke question.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
When the doctors do their creative writing, can they read their own writing?
Thank goodness. Okay, so this is where we can say maybe there is a silver lining to the EHR, the electronic health record.
Yes.
We've all had to learn how to either type or dictate.
Very good.
It's working out in our benefit. Thank you. People have asked me what the silver lining is, and I haven't known what to say, but
there you go. You got it. Yeah, you did it.
It's really funny.
I mean, talk about a stereotype, but it's
oh my gosh, I can't even imagine if I had to read people's handwriting. That would be a whole nother thing. Yeah. No, we're not doing that.
Good. Yeah, well, especially with the way everything's computerized today. I mean, I don't think they actually write anything anymore. Do doctors actually physically write anything anymore? As a doctor, I mean?
Oh gosh, only when the electronic health record goes down. So when the power goes out.
Right.
And then we have to transcribe it later. So it's not a good thing. So yeah, very, very rarely do we write anything. Even prescriptions, almost everything is on the computer now.
Nope, there goes that stereotype into history. Where it probably belongs anyway. Right. Yeah.
Thank goodness, right? Because there's a lot of medical errors that just went into history too that are based on not being able to read what was written.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, this is really interesting. Let's see if we can delve in a little bit deeper. I love the fact that you are trying to help fellow doctors, fellow clinicians, to deal with stuff that I imagine the general public just isn't even aware of. Because, I mean, when we see a doctor, we're just seeing the professional doctor, and we're evaluating them as a professional, and are they meeting my needs, and why am I only getting 5 minutes, blah, 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 blah. The last thing that most people are thinking about is, I wonder if the doctor is getting his needs met. I mean, that's not even on the table, right?
No.
Because you're there to get your needs met.
Yes.
But I think it's really great that we're getting that perspective. I mean, doctors are human beings. And I actually think that I understand how the medical profession got to where it is today. I think anyone who's ever studied the history of it can understand it pretty easily, or even if they haven't studied it. But there's a part of it that kind of bugs me a little bit, and that is we've put doctors onto pedestals. And when anybody's on a pedestal, it's really hard for them to ever win. And it's really hard for everybody else to think independently of them. And as a result of that, you end up with a scenario where I think that the medical profession in some ways has kind of gotten a little, I don't know, etched in stone, maybe is a way to describe it. Like it's fixed. This is the way it always has to be. It always will be, and all that kind of thing. And that's not healthy. That's not human. We've taken the humanity out of the doctors and out of the medical profession, which is exactly the opposite of what it should be.
Gosh, it's so interesting to hear you say this, because I feel like I don't think doctors are on pedestals at all anymore. And maybe we are to some extent, but I feel like the climate currently in medical care is much more challenge your doctor, question your doctor. And maybe that's because I'm a pediatrician and we're offering vaccines, and the whole anti-vaccine movement really started the same year I graduated medical school.
Good timing. Well, all right. Yeah.
Right. So I feel like I have been questioned my entire career over things that we consider standard medical practice. So that might be more profession dependent or specialty dependent, right? I can imagine that you go see a surgeon, you're a little more likely to be like, well, you're the expert here because I really don't know anything about surgery.
Which is what I meant about the pedestal. That's the pedestal right there.
Yeah. But when you go see your pediatrician who's all friendly and loves to see your kid, because I do, because no one goes into pediatrics unless we just want to like squeeze babies and hug 6-year-olds. Like that's just part of it. I think people feel much more comfortable questioning what we know, especially in the current climate. And to a certain point, that's actually really healthy. We should have a dialogue. There should be a good conversation. And as long as that's a two-way street and there's truly a seeking and providing of information going on, that's excellent. I would say that isn't always the case. And I'm sometimes taken aback by feeling like patients are angry at me for even suggesting something because they've already come in with a preconceived notion about it. And so I do feel like this is another casualty of the fact that medicine is treated, or your medical visit is much more of a commodity now, and your clinician is treated like they're interchangeable.
Yeah.
And so people feel like I'm paying my money here so I can have my school physical done, but I don't really want to know what you have to say.
Yes.
Does that make sense? So
Yes.
once you commoditize a patient-doctor relationship, it's not a relationship anymore. It's a transaction.
Right.
So, the whole old thing about the doctors on the pedestal and all that, I feel like that dynamic has changed quite a bit, at least from where I stand. And there's much more of an unknown when I go into a room. I have so many wonderful families in my practice, and there's so many people I'm thrilled to see. I love to talk to. They are receptive to having conversations, and many of them may not vaccinate, but they're interested in engaging in that relationship and that conversation. And that's what it's about, right? The ones where I walk in and I've got someone sitting in the corner with their arms crossed and they're mad because I'm 5 minutes late, and, I'm not meeting whatever expectation before I even walk in the room. Right. That's a different dynamic than what we've ever sort of stereotyped in the past.
That's true. I kind of consider that to be, maybe not fallout, a corollary, if you will, to what you were talking about before, how you're supposed to get everything done in a more compressed time frame. Mm-hmm. Well, when you're in a compressed time frame, then the patient expects, it's got to be a compressed time frame. I got to be quick here. You're cutting into my time. What are you doing? Get in here. It's that kind of a thing.
Partially, although I will say that doesn't usually translate into, I don't know. One of my other jobs, one of the other hats I wear is as a clinician communication coach. And I love this work because it's really about reinstating that relationship, right? And when I go into a room, I sit down and I listen, and it will take the time it takes. And that may be why I run late. But every patient is going to get their full amount of time. And some people need more time and some people need less time. And
that's an attitude, by the way. What you're talking about there, it's a practice of yours, but it's also an attitude, and it's one that I applaud. And I think anybody listening is applauding it too. You've chosen to kind of buck the trend a little bit and say, no, forget all that. I'm going to be the doctor I need to be, and that my patients need me to be, because that is how I can be true to myself. But not all doctors do that. Correct. And I think that's where the problem comes in. Some of them are, I have a good friend who was one of my original co-hosts on the show, Joel Elston, and he talked about, he told a number of stories. One particular story was about a psychiatrist he knew who was literally trying to process as many people through his office every day as he could and issue a drug. He didn't care about whether or not he was actually helping anybody get better mentally. He didn't care about all he cared about was how many could he process in a day. Now, I'm not saying he is representative of all the medical establishment. I'm just saying that kind of person exists. And, it's that to me is where the problem is. It's in the attitude.
And that's true. You can't generalize. We are not all interchangeable. And that's the problem, right? We aren't really a commodity. We are individuals. And when you try to make everything, cookie cutter and templated and all of that, it takes something away from the reason to go into medicine. And that's why I work part-time. And that's why I have to kind of try to reclaim some of this, because if your work is meaningful, if your connections with patients are meaningful, you go home at the end of the day feeling fulfilled by your job and feeling glad that you're doing the work you're doing. Finding that balance isn't always easy. And I think that, it is a mindset. You're right. It's something that you have to seek, and you have to recognize the value to your own self of giving, right? Who's happier at the end of the day? It's usually the person who's giving of themselves. If you lose the ability to give, well, then there's something broken, right? Yeah. And there's some other way that you need to be able to fill your cup so that you can then be that person who can find generosity and feel good about yourself again.
And what you found for yourself, and what you've also been trying to bring to other clinicians, is the way to fill your cup through the arts, through writing, through expressing yourself. Talk about how that functions in your mind. Why is that so effective?
There's several answers to that, I would say. Okay. I think the act of reflecting by itself is really important. It's part of just being in touch with who you are and what resonates with you. Anytime that I am feeling overly emotional or stressed or whatever it may be, if I sit down and just hammer out a page, I write on the computer now. I realize some people think that's not as pure as handwriting, but my handwriting has never been great. So,
hey, I'm with you. I mean, quite honestly, whenever I try to write with my hand, I cramp up. When I type it, it's like everything's flowing. I go with the typewriter, the heck with the rest of it.
But I can get my thoughts out faster. And honestly, by the end of that, I may not have fixed it, but I've made sense of it. So I think it's just an act of self-reflection, and other people can get at this other ways. I've never been terribly good at meditating unless I'm also moving. Like you put me on a bike and I'm going straight for a long time. Like I can be somewhat transcendent in my own way. But otherwise for me, the way that I find flow is by just getting it all out, writing it. So I think that's one of the ways that it can be part of it. I think the other thing, and there was really actually, I wish I knew exactly where I found this study, but there was an interesting study about the improvement in emotional intelligence in people who read short stories. And
really?
what it has to do with is when you're reading fiction stories about other people, you're reading other people's feelings and opinions and experiences, and it helps you decenter from your own. Oh, yeah. So we live in such a me culture, right? That we're so focused on what do I do for my well-being and is my life perfect? And how do I do this for me? But really, it's not about us only, right? It's really about making sense of other people's experiences and how are we relating to other people. And so reading is actually a beautiful way of not only getting out of your own life when it's stressful and there's other things going on, but it helps sort of flex that empathy muscle. And that really helps when you're having difficult interactions, especially if those difficult interactions are happening at work or happening several times a day. The more that we can kind of flex those empathy muscles or get away from our own personal day-to-day, those are really valuable tools in holding on to our meaning and our reasons for doing things and our ways to connect with people, even when they stress us out.
I love what you're describing there for a number of reasons, not the least of which because one of the things that we talk about a lot here on the show outside of conversations about medicine is the value of journaling and how journaling can actually help you in a number of different ways in terms of achieving your goals, releasing stress, all kinds of stuff like that. And that's essentially what you're talking about. You're talking about the doctors doing the journaling, but it's journaling. It's basically just writing for the sake of expressing yourself to yourself, if to nobody else.
Right.
Yeah.
And then lately my book is memoir. It was about the process of going through medical school and, finding the right words for those experiences and being able to share them with other people. And the number of revisions that you go through in doing that, to hone that description so that it really is meaningful to other people, I think taking that to a whole nother level of like, okay, I didn't just write this for me to process it, but I want other people to hear this story, or I want them to understand or have empathy for what it's like to be in this scenario. More recently, I've been writing poetry. And so what I'm honing may be just a tiny little moment, just a little realization. But trying to find the most precise words for that is a really fun, creative challenge. People in my writing workshop write fiction. And there's nothing much more fun than turning a character or somebody that you know into a character in a story because you're pulling the strings, right? So suddenly you're the puppet master, and people who intrigue you or frustrate you or interest you, you can really spend some energy getting inside their heads. Again, this is part of that empathy muscle that we're talking about, but also being able to transform that experience into writing a creative story.
Yeah, really nice. And you entitled your book Balance, Pedal, Breathe. There sounds like there's a story right behind that. What's the story behind that?
So the phrase balance, pedal, breathe comes from a story in the book where I'm writing about being in second year. The way that I would just deal when things got stressful was get on my mountain bike, and I would bike across Golden Gate Bridge because I was at UCSF. I would bike into the Murray Headlands, but when there was a lot of wind, when you try to go across that bridge, it's no small feat, and you would come to each of the supports and you'd have to turn into the wind and then turn back forward and then turn out of the wind. So you get propelled forward and then turn. So there was really this moment, at every joist where you kind of had to put a lot of effort into balancing, pedal really fast, take a deep breath and not panic because you're looking down at the ocean down there, and then keep going. So that's where it came from. But truly, metaphorically, it really spoke to kind of the whole medical school process, right?
Really?
It was very much about for me as an emotionally present human who wanted to not completely lose myself in medicine and who didn't want to be completely changed by the process of going to medical school. Mm-hmm. I needed to find balance, as I was going through it. And at every stage it's different because there's, the kind of the preclinical years are all the book learning years. And that was challenging in its own way. And then your clinical years, you're going through all the different specialties. So, for these 6 weeks, you're going to practice being a psychiatrist. Okay. And now you're going to deliver babies. And now you're going to be an internal medicine doctor. And so you're trying these identities on for periods of time. So finding balance can be different at various different times in there. Pedal, because that refers to my mountain biking need. But actually the book is about just as much about rock climbing and hiking and skiing and swing dancing, because I have never been a person.
We got to come back to that.
Yeah.
Because I was too.
Oh, cool. How fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was never a person who could hold still for very long. And so being pushed to sit and study was extremely difficult for someone like me who really needed to be outside. So each of my different chapters actually relates to a different activity outdoors. So there's a lot in this book about outdoor sports, as much as there is about learning different fields of medicine as a student, as someone with fresh eyes who's never seen it before. And then breathe, because this is what we all have to remember to do. This is what we all come back to. It's our most vital function. It's our primary way of assessing people too, when we're learning to assess patients and figure out whether they're safe or not, whether they're dying or not. The book is about, confronting mortality as well. It's about seeing a lung that is not working anymore for the first time, as much as it is about feeling your own lungs burning when you're really working hard to achieve something physically. So, the title, there's many aspects to the title. Yeah. Sorry, long-winded response. I guess.
No need to apologize. I love the windedness. I think we all do, because that's what you're basically telling a story. And that story, no matter what the form of the story is, as long as it's a genuine story, everybody loves hearing a genuine story. It just feels good. So no, definitely. Thank you for telling us about that. I didn't realize that, when you're going through, medical school, you're spending a little time in each of the different specialties. I've just never heard that happens. And I'm really glad of it, because I really do believe it's the best way to, not just with medicine, but anything in life, just trying one thing after another is the best way to find out what your passion is. And that sounds like that's what doctors are able to do. They're able to say, oh yeah, I really love internal medicine, or I really am interested in, whatever, ear, nose, throat. It doesn't matter what it is, but they find something that just resonates with them. That's really great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Very, very important.
Yeah. That's mostly third year of medical school. And it's a critical stage, because you really are literally trying these professions on for size. You're
right. Yeah.
Shadowing other doctors, and you're, putting on that short white coat and pretending that you're whatever specialty it might be. And, it's absolutely invaluable. I don't know how anyone would pick a specialty without it.
Yeah. Well, it makes total sense. I mean, because I have no idea how anyone would pick a specialty anyway. So it's nice to know how it's done. Also, you mentioned you're a swing dancer. I was a swing dancer for about a 10-year period. So I'm really curious to know, how'd you get into that, and what'd you love about it? I mean, from my perspective, it's really easy what you love about it, but listeners might not know.
Well, let's see. I started to learn during my second year, and I think there's many reasons. I loved the music. I loved the connectedness. I loved the challenge of not only learning the steps, but then being able to fit that with somebody else. I mean, talk about a conversation, talk about, a way to connect with people. There really is that just beautiful combination of needing to hone yourself and your own skills, and then needing to hone your sensitivity to be able to dance with another person. Yeah. And it also became a big part of my social life, because once you've been doing it for a little while, if you show up to the same things as other people enough times, these become your very best friends.
They do.
And I think the other thing that was really important for me is, as a medical student, I often felt really inept. I felt like I was the bottom of this whole big feeding chain and I would never gain mastery. And, you feel like you're about this tall sometimes. And then I would go out dancing and someone would be like, wow, you're a medical student. Like, this is a cool thing, right?
Right.
And having that contrast was really helpful for me to not feel this teeny tiny.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, you know what? Actually, it is kind of cool that I keep showing up every day. You know, I shouldn't expect myself to already know everything because I'm a student.
Of course,
right?
That's what being a student is.
Yeah. So I think having that balance and that connectedness outside of medicine was really a wonderful counterpoint. And that's part of that balance I was talking about, right?
I'm glad you mentioned the connection too, because I totally understand what you're talking about. Anybody who's done any kind of partner dancing knows, but especially in swing dancing, it is critical because without it, you really can't actually coordinate together to make the dance work. But when you do it, you learn connection in a way that you've never really learned it before. And I keep thinking to myself, my God, that must serve you so well when you finally become a doctor, because you learn to connect on a level that many people have never learned to do.
Well, and that's empathic touch too.
Yep.
Right. So I incorporate stories of swing dancing in the chapter on surgery, because in the surgery rotation, you're learning a whole different way of interacting with another human. Right. And touch has a whole different meaning when you're actually going to be operating on someone.
Yeah.
Whereas what I had thought of it more would be more of the empathic touch and the connected touch. So, that contrast is something that I exploited in that chapter. And I think it worked pretty darn well as a way to kind of just demonstrate what it was like to consider surgery as a profession and also come out the other side of that rotation, not feeling, like I'd forgotten how people can touch each other.
Well, I would also imagine it would influence your choice toward the direction that you actually chose to become a pediatrician. Because in pediatrics, like you were describing before, you want to hug babies and all this kind of stuff. Well, that's touch. That's touch on a very basic, fundamental level right there. And I kind of imagine that swing dancing, it may not have convinced you to do that particular direction, but it certainly influenced your desire because you had already kind of trained yourself to have that connection.
Yeah. That's nature or nurture there a little bit. I think that's nature probably for me.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
And then it's a question of finding your fit, right? What fits with what feels right to you.
That raises another thought that comes to my mind, that because whenever I'm interviewing anybody, I'm thinking not only what works within their topic, but how does this apply to the broader population? Because we can all learn from each other, no matter what we do, no matter what our interests are, what we do for work, what our family life is, no matter what any of that stuff is, we can still learn from each other. So
absolutely,
when I think about somebody telling your story, I think about, well, all right, we're talking about somebody who has really brought the arts into what she does. She has married her passions together. She's also discovered, partly through the process that the medical school setup gives you, what your passion is in life. These are things that lots of people have trouble doing, no matter what their field is. And some people don't even know what their field is. That was me for the longest time. I didn't know what my field was. I mean, my field was IT. Did I love it? Yeah, not really.
Yeah.
I was good at it, so I did it, but it really wasn't my thing, And it's important to me because what I've discovered is, and this kind of alludes to what you were talking about much earlier about how stuff can lead to burnout. When you're not doing what's your passion, it does lead to burnout. It almost doesn't even matter whether you find balance, because without that passion to drive you, it becomes drudgery. No matter what it is you're talking about. My wife discovered that with gardening. She's a gardener. Before that, she was a psychotherapist, but she became a gardener. Okay. And she loved the gardening, and then she had to run the business side of it. And she hated the business side of it. And it got to the point where the idea of getting up in the morning to work on the gardening business was a pain. It was a physical pain. In fact, literally, this is not an exaggeration. It literally ended up in the long run putting her in the hospital with hypothyroidism. Because, she was just eating herself up, doing a side of the business that she didn't love, knowing perfectly well that she had people on the field doing the work for her that she wanted to do herself because she had to do the business side.
Right.
So that's what I'm talking about. Knowing what you love and doing what you love really is that important. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And people often ask, like, why didn't I pursue writing if that was my passion? That was my major in college too. Like I always knew I wanted to write, but I was really afraid to pursue it as a profession, to be honest. And I'm grateful that I've been able to kind of guard it off to the side as this passion project. Yeah. And there's times that you kind of look at your day job and go, oh, maybe I should quit it and just follow my passion. But there is, there can be too much of a good thing, or there can be aspects of that wonderful, precious thing that, like your wife experienced, that kind of kill it for you. So I think that's a really important reflection too. And, I'm just a big fan of not defining yourself by one thing.
Yes.
I think we need a variety of pursuits, and we need that variety to change over time.
And I consider that to be a 21st century value, because I think back to my father. My father was like so many people of that generation, the World War II generation. He worked in the same company doing relatively the same kinds of jobs for all his life, 44 years with one company,
Yeah.
By today's standards, that's almost crazy.
Right.
But it shows how much I think we've actually transversed over into a much healthier area, where people are willing to consider possibilities that are different from what their original idea was, and where they realize, well, I'm not locked into something just because that's what I studied in college, or that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years or whatever. I can change. I can shift. Yes. And I think it's important because a lot of people have been doing it. A lot of people have been doing it successfully, but there are many people who are kind of scared to. There's fear plays such a role in so many areas of our society. And one of those areas is in the area of career. And, you get into a place that they often call it a comfort zone. I don't really think it's comfortable. I think it's more of a familiar zone, but whatever you want to call it, they get into a zone where they don't dare make the shift. Kind of along the lines of what you were talking about earlier, although yours was different. Medicine, that's going to be where I make the money. That's where I'm going to have the most successful career. That theme plays out with a lot of people in a lot of different fields. They go into fields simply for the money. I did that. I went into IT for that because I knew there was money there, Yeah. And I paid the price for it too.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think you're right. I think that happens a lot. And I am not blind to the fact that I was fortunate to feel that direction, to feel that calling toward medicine. Wonderful. And to not have to question that part of it until I actually got to medical school, and then thought, I'm not sure this is what I thought I was doing.
Is this what I signed up for? Oh my God.
Exactly. Right. Like there was a little bit of that denial. And part of it was I took a year off after college because I wanted to. And so I was sort of fancy free. And then I got to medical school, and it was, I think, twice as hard to really buckle back down and be like, oh yeah, no, my time is not my own. But back to the original point, I do recognize, I think that most people don't necessarily know what they want to do. They don't finish college going, okay, my next step is going to be X, Y, or Z. And that's, that can be a much less direct road. I do think that by honoring diverse interests, it's easier to find your way. And that may not be right away, but I think that those diverse interests really do play a part in who we are and help us identify what aspect of ourselves we're satisfying with them. Now, you're talking to somebody who still skis and mountain bikes and rides horses and does a million things on the side in addition to the writing and medicine. So I may be a little biased here, but I also think that all of these things fulfill an aspect of myself that deserves to be honored to a point. And there's choices, right? Can't do all of them all of the time. So you have to pick what matters the most in that particular time, but it's worth honoring them. And if what you're doing is not fulfilling, that's where I would write reflectively and be like, okay, what am I missing? What's going on? What's going to do it? The other piece of that I think is something that I remember from when I first started medical school is one of our deans stood up at the front of class and said, choose something outside of medicine, some skill or some interest to hone while you're in medical school.
Good advice.
And it was great advice. And, I'm sitting there going, well, I want to do 20 things. How am I going to pick? Right? Because that's me. But I've thought of that advice so many times over the years because I think it is really important. We all need to remain amateurs at something. We all need to be learning something all of the time. So, it may be like, I want to go do a writing conference in a field of writing that I'm not skilled at. And part of that is because I feel like a total amateur and I want to be getting better at something, right? I still take horseback riding lessons and I'm doing a different discipline in horseback riding than I used to because I want to be growing all the time. And I think that desire to be growing and desire to be learning, I think is pretty innate. So if your job isn't giving you that, if you can do it by rote and it's just the familiar, then it either needs to come from outside the job or we need to be willing to be amateur at our job and try something different.
I like that. That's good. Also, the example of your story, I think, is useful to people who have not found what their passion is. And the reason I say that is I think actually most people can actually find their passion if they allow themselves to believe they already have it. And what I mean by that is you knew at a very young age, and you knew it clearly. I think that's what the difference is. You knew clearly that you loved writing, and and also from a young age, you knew clearly that you loved medicine. You didn't allow yourself, your parents, your teachers, your friends, peers, you didn't allow anybody to talk you out of it. You didn't allow anybody to poo-poo it or in any way put it down. And you insisted on hanging on to it. I think so many of us, we actually find things that we like in our younger years. Not all of us, but a lot of us do. And we get talked out of them one way or another. And so the passion was actually there, but no one ever makes money being a jazz singer. You can't really do that. So you need to change, to find yourself something, become a doctor, become a doctor or a lawyer.
Right. Yeah.
It's that kind of a thing, right? That we get talked out of it.
Sure. Well, I mean, the benefit of having medicine be something you like is that nobody tries to talk you out of it. They're like, oh, that's great. Yeah, you should really do that. So, I mean, I didn't have that part of the experience, but the writing part of it, trying to be pre-med and being a writing major, there definitely were some raised eyebrows and some, are you sure you want to do that? But because medicine was one of the things, I didn't get that trying to be talked out of it thing that I think a lot of people get.
That's good. Yeah.
Gosh, I wish I could sing. That is one thing. And to some extent, there are things that I would always be an amateur at. So I guess you can't follow everything, but.
Well, regardless of whether you're going to do it now, there may come a time when you decide you want to sing. It may even come at a point where you say, I feel like I've had a full career as a pediatrician. I'm going to start putting that aside. I want to become more of a singer. And something like that could happen, It
could happen theoretically. I fortunately, I have
I
plenty
can
of
tell
other
from the way you
things to
say
spend my time.
that's not likely to happen. I get that. Yeah.
No, not for me. You haven't heard me sing, and some of us, it's kind of like yes, you should follow a passion and you should follow an interest. And there's also some limits there too, right? Like I could say I would like to fly and I would have about as equal a chance of flying as singing well. So, there are limits to what's reasonable there, I guess, but there sure are an awful lot of great choices that are perhaps more reasonable.
I didn't mean to be putting on you something that wasn't comfortable for you. I was just trying to use it as an example. But, that's good stuff. So, anyway, tell us a little bit more about the book, Balance, Pedal, Breathe. I mean, you gave us a little bit of a clue, but can you pick a story out of there that would be interesting for the audience?
So one of the stories, which story? So, one of the chapters that I'm going to mention that I haven't talked about in a little while is one, at the end that talks about managing the feelings of uncertainty. I think many of us have feelings of uncertainty, and this is mostly, supposed to reflect on uncertainty in medicine. right? Because this
Sure.
is a book about becoming a doctor.
Yep.
But I interwove examples with a day-long rock climbing trip that I took with my then boyfriend, up the side of a mountain that he had climbed years before, but we didn't have a map. We didn't have a guidebook. We weren't really sure where the route was.
Wow.
It was highly irresponsible, for sure, to climb this. And yet, you know, I had limited time off. We had this one day. We went up there and camped, and by God, we were going to try to climb this. And so I really, this was one of the first chapters I had published. It was published years ago when I first wrote, most of the book I wrote while I was still in medical school. And this chapter got, snapped up pretty quickly because it so, interweaves the kinds of tension, the physical tension, the emotional tension. You know, this is a boyfriend I didn't know if I would stay with or not. Sure. In addition to, the feelings of, okay, I'm almost a doctor and I didn't even bring a med kit on this climb. Like, and then just, you know, what happens when you encounter a resuscitation? Do I really have the skills to handle the situations I'm going to encounter at the next step in medicine? How do you face down the self-doubt when other people are looking to you for care? Or how do you face down the self-doubt when you're on the side of a mountain 3 pitches up and it's your turn to do the next pitch? Yeah. And your boyfriend's looking at you and you're looking down going, what am I doing here exactly? So, I mean, I think it's things like that. I really tried to bring in the way that life offers us this. I'm going to use the word abundance because I love that word. But this abundance of very disparate experiences that relate to one another. And that's really what I tried to do in this book is incorporate the ways in which our different experiences are very much related and give us perspective that we can use in different situations. So mountain biking gave me perspective to get through my second year of medical school. Beautiful. Traveling abroad gave me perspective on how to survive as a student on the wards for the first time when I really felt like I was speaking another language. Wow. So examples like that.
Very nice. Yeah, I like that. Now, there is one aspect of the medical profession that you probably don't encounter it too often, although you might sometimes encounter it as a pediatrician. But anybody who's in medicine knows at some point you're confronting death. And death is uncomfortable, and it causes all kinds of challenging situations, you know, distraught people and so forth, relatives, friends. I imagine that was part of the journey as well, because when you go through medical school, it's not like you're blocked away. Well, we'll get to death, you know, in the postgraduate. No, it's part of what you're dealing with.
Yeah. So, I mean, anatomy lab is one of your first experiences as a medical student. And anatomy lab means that you are dissecting a human body over the course of a couple of months. And my experience just before starting medical school, I was on a search and rescue team. I lived in the Eastern Sierra. I decided to be totally hedonistic that year and live in the mountains and waitress. And I volunteered with a search and rescue team. And we had a body recovery call out. And when I talk about my experience with the cadaver, with being a first year medical student in anatomy lab, I am interweaving that also with stories of this body recovery and the very different ways of encountering a body that's no longer animate and what that means and how you make sense of it. Because that's kind of the most notorious touchstone as a first year medical student. And then, of course, as you go through, there are other experiences. There are patients who die. There are many different approaches to death that you encounter through people's stories as well as through being their caregivers in the medical setting. So you're absolutely right. Mortality is always present as you're training to become a doctor.
So the natural the natural question that comes out of that for me is, how do you deal with it? What is it that you learn as a doctor in medical school, first year, or, you know, pre-doctor, I guess, that helps you to deal with that and to make sense of it, even though it's nonsensical, and to come to terms with it and actually accept it, embrace it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's simply that we all die. This is going to happen. And you can't escape it. You will never escape it. It's going to happen at some point in your life. And what you make of your life is what matters, more than anything else. Now there's other aspects to it. I think there's a lot to be said for thinking about dying, thinking about how you want to die, especially if you have a chronic condition or unfortunately a fatal condition that is going to shorten your life. Thinking ahead to how you want to die, I think, is actually really important. And being able to confront that reality is the first step. And we could talk a really long time about how uncomfortable Americans are with the concept of death. Ultimately, for someone who might die in a medical setting, I think it's really important to have very clear thoughts about what you do and don't want. Because I think that most people would prefer their death to be peaceful. Most people would prefer that their death be painless, when you have control over that. I think some of it is simply through exposure, you become comfortable with the idea that everyone is going to die. Everyone you care about is going to die, and you're going to die too. And you kind of have to sit with that for a while and get used to that for a while. And I think once you can recognize that death is not the worst thing, then it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
One of the most interesting answers I ever heard to the question that you raised, what do you want where your death is concerned, comes from Abraham Hicks. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Abraham Hicks, but Esther Hicks channels Abraham, and it's where a lot of law of attraction teaching comes from. And one of the things that those of us who have followed that teaching have learned about Esther Hicks is that her desire is live, have fun, live, have fun, live, have fun, die.
Okay.
Which is an interesting perspective. And it's one I share. I love that one. The reason I bring it up is that I think one of the biggest challenges all of us have is, well, what if my death is preceded by an illness like you were describing, or a condition that's untreatable or something along that line? How do you handle that? And by the same token, and this is not the right time to talk about this because we got 3 minutes left in the program, but to what degree can we influence whether or not that's going to be the end? And that's a whole can of worms right there.
It is. I think that the focus needs to be on living well and living in a way that we can be proud of, that we can feel like we have done what we really want to achieve in this life. And that we have been, we can be proud of what we've offered to the world, so I guess, to me, that's the only thing that makes sense, is to focus on the how of living.
Okay.
More than anything else. And, as entrancing as the idea of just having fun until you die is, I don't think that's a very meaningful existence. I think that takes away from the relationality of all of us, right? And our relationships to one another are really important. And so when we talk about what makes a meaningful life, it's how we treat one another. It's what we do for one another and how we care for other people. But you're talking to a doctor who went into medicine for a reason. So to me, that's what makes for a meaningful life. So it isn't just the fun, it's the meaning that we can infuse into it and take out of it.
All right. Very good. Well, the book again is called Balance, Pedal, Breathe. I presume it's available Amazon and everywhere else. I mean, it's one of those, right? Yes.
Yep. Amazon, it's Barnes and Noble. It's, they're in some bookstores, but mostly available online. Powell's Books has it too.
And there's also the possibility there might be a physician or two listening to the podcast. If somebody's listening and they kind of like what you're talking about, they want to reach out to you, how do they find you?
Probably the easiest way is through my website. There's a contact button there. My website is www.claireunis.net. Claire is Claire, Unis, UNIS.net. And I can be contacted there, and there's information on the book and everything else too.
All right. Beautiful. Well, this has been wonderful. There's one thing I want to tell you that I make it a practice to tell all of my guests, because it really does apply to all of them, and it certainly applies to you. You obviously, as a doctor, you interact with patients every single day, but as a writer and as a podcast guest and your other roles as well, you also reach out and touch people who you'll never meet, you'll never see them, but you've helped them in some way. And so on their behalf, I want to thank you for what you do in that way, reaching out to those people that you'll never meet, you'll never see, but you're touching their lives for the better. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Walt. Isn't that true of what you're doing here too? I'm so grateful for this podcast, and I'm so happy to have met you. Thank you so much.
We're happy to have met you too. This has been, our day is now richer just because we met you. So thank you very much, Dr. Clara Unis. And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.